Welcome to this lecture series on web development essentials. In this video, we're going to cover 3 important topics that come up when you're building and deploying a web project, specifically a news portal. We'll start with an overview of SEO, or search engine optimization, then move into database management using cPanel and PHP-MyAdmin, and finally, look at how to handle public versus private file access in a Laravel application. Let's get into it. Let's start with SEO, search engine optimization. The idea behind SEO is to make your website easy for search engines like Google to find, understand, and rank. Now, SEO is a broad topic, but for the purposes of this lecture, it's broken down into 2 main parts. The first part is about the code you write, specifically the HTML attributes you use in your markup. The second part is about meta tags, those special HTML tags that give search engines structured information about your page. We'll explore both of these areas as we go through the material. The first part of SEO is all about the code you write. When you build a web page, the way you structure your HTML has a direct impact on how search engines read and interpret your content. For example, using semantic HTML tags like header, main, article, and footer tells the search engine what each section of your page is about. It's not just about making the page look good, it's about giving the browser and the search engine meaningful context. Similarly, attributes like the alt attribute on images or title attributes on links help search engines understand content that they can't visually see. And heading hierarchy matters too. Your H1 should be the most important heading, followed by H2, H3, and so on. These are all things you control directly in your code. The second part of SEO is meta tags. Meta tags live inside the head section of your HTML document. They're not visible to users on the page, but they're extremely important for search engines. The title tag is what shows up in the browser tab and as the clickable link in Google search results. The description meta tag provides a short summary of your page. That's the little snippet of text you see under a link in search results. The keywords tag gives search engines hints about what topics your page covers, and the author tag credits who created the content. Together, these tags form a kind of identity card for your web page that search engines read before they even look at your visible content. Now, let's shift to the practical side, setting up a news portal project on a web server. The process involves several steps that need to happen in the right order. First, you upload your project code to the public_HTML folder on your hosting server. Then you create a database in cPanel. After that, you create a database user, and then you assign that user the necessary privileges to access the database. Once that's done, you can import your local database to the server. And finally, you connect everything and test it. We're going to walk through each of these steps in detail. The first step is getting your code onto the server. In cPanel, there's a directory called public_HTML. This is the root folder that your web server serves to visitors. You navigate into public_HTML and place your project folder there. If your project is called News Portal, your code and theme files will live inside that folder. The structure you set up locally on your machine should mirror what you put on the server. This is important because any file paths you've used in your code for images, style sheets, scripts need to resolve correctly in the server environment too. Next, we create the database. In cPanel, you go to the MySQL Databases section and create a new database. Here's something important to understand. When you type a name like News Portal, cPanel doesn't just save it as News Portal. It automatically prefixes it with your cPanel account username. So if your username is Suthem, the actual database name becomes Suthem_News Portal. This is a very common source of confusion for beginners. Always make note of the full database name, including the prefix, because that's what you'll need to enter in your application's configuration file. After creating the database, you need to create a database user. Think of this as creating a login account specifically for your application to connect to the database. You give it a username, something like portal user, and again, cPanel will prefix it with your account username, so the final username might be Suthem_portal user. For the password, it's strongly recommended to use the built-in password generator. It creates a strong, random password that's much more secure than anything you type manually. The critical thing here, copy that password and save it somewhere safe immediately. You will need it when configuring your application, and there's no way to retrieve it later. Creating a database and a user separately isn't enough. You have to explicitly connect them. This step is called assigning privileges. You go back to the MySQL Databases section, find the Add User to Database area, select your user and your database, and click Add. Then you'll be asked what level of access to grant. For a web application, you typically grant all privileges. This means the user can read data, write data, update records, delete records, create tables, and alter the database structure. Without this step, your application simply cannot even if the username and password are correct. It's a security gate that you have to explicitly open. Now let's talk about exporting your database. When you've built your project locally and you want to move it to a live server or share it with a teammate, you need to export the database. In PHP-MyAdmin, you select your database from the left sidebar, then click the Export tab. The most common format is SQL, which creates a file containing all the commands needed to recreate your database structure and data on another server. But PHP-MyAdmin also supports other formats. You can export to CSV if you need to open the data in a spreadsheet, or to PDF if you need a printable report. For server migrations and developer collaboration, SQL is the standard choice. Importing is the reverse process. Once you have your SQL file, whether you exported it from your local machine or received it from a colleague, you go to PHP-MyAdmin on the destination server, select the target database, and click the Import tab. You choose the SQL file from your computer and click Go. PHP-MyAdmin reads the file and executes all the SQL commands inside it, recreating your tables and data in the new database. This is how you move a complete database from your local development environment to a live server. It's a fundamental workflow that every web developer needs to know. It's worth pausing to understand the difference between your local database and your server database. When you're developing on your own computer, using tools like XAMPP or WAMP, your database is running locally. Only you can access it, and it's purely for development and testing. The live server database, on the other hand, is hosted remotely and is accessible to anyone who visits your website. The bridge between these two environments is the SQL export and import process we just covered. Moving your project from local to live is called deployment, and then the database across correctly is one of the most important parts of that process. Now let's talk about something that trips up a lot of Laravel beginners, the difference between private and public file storage. In Laravel, files are stored in two main locations. The private storage area is not accessible through a browser URL. It's meant for sensitive files, like configuration data, environment variables, and anything you don't want the public to reach. The public storage area, on the other hand, is directly accessible via a URL. This is where you put things like uploaded images, style sheets, and JavaScript files that your users need to download. By default, Laravel keeps uploaded files in the private storage, which is why you sometimes need to take extra steps to make them publicly accessible. To change the visibility of your storage, you need to edit a configuration file in Laravel. The file is called filesystems.php, and it lives inside the config folder of your Laravel project. Around line 35, you'll find a setting called Visibility that is set to private by default. To make your uploaded files publicly accessible, you change that value from private to public. This is a simple one-word change, but it has a significant effect. It tells Laravel that files stored in this disk should be readable by anyone with the URL. This is the setting you need to adjust when your images or media uploads aren't showing up on the front end. Even after changing the visibility setting, there's one more step you need to take in Laravel, running the command php artisan storage link. What this command does is create a symbolic link, which is essentially a shortcut, between your storage folder and the public folder. Specifically, it links storage/app/public to public/storage. This means that when someone visits a URL like yoursite.com/storage/image.jpg, Laravel can serve the actual file that's stored in the private storage directory. Without this link, the URL would lead nowhere. You only need to run this command once per project setup, but it's a step that's easy to forget and can cause a lot of confusion when images don't load. Sometimes when you run the storage link command, it fails because a storage folder already exists in the public directory. In that case, there's a workaround. First, rename the existing storage folder to something temporary, like van or storage old, just to get it out of the way. Then run the php artisan storage link command, which will now successfully create a fresh symbolic link as a new storage folder. After that, copy the contents from your renamed folder, specifically the files inside the public subfolder, and paste them into the newly created storage folder. This way, you don't lose any of your existing uploaded files, and the symlink is set up correctly. The final piece of the puzzle is making sure your actual image files are in the right place. If your images were uploaded or stored in the private subfolder inside storage, they won't be accessible via a URL. The web server simply won't serve them. You need to move them, cut and paste, from the private folder into the public subfolder inside storage. Once they're in the public folder and the storage link is set up correctly, those images will be accessible through the browser. This is a common issue when migrating a Laravel project from one server to another, or when setting it up for the first time on a live host. Once all the setup steps are complete, the admin panel becomes accessible. On the news portal website, there's typically a link or button, often labeled Admin, somewhere in the navigation. Clicking that takes the user to the login page, usually at a URL like yoursite.com/admin. After logging in with the correct credentials, the admin dashboard opens up, and from there, the site administrator can create, edit, and manage news articles. This is the end goal of all the setup work we've been discussing. The checklist on this slide summarizes everything that needs to be in place before the admin panel will work correctly. Code uploaded, database created and configured, user privileges assigned, database imported, and storage properly linked. Now, when it comes to SEO optimization, the instructor breaks it down into two distinct areas. The first is your own written code, meaning all the HTML you write, and the second is meta tags. These are treated as two separate concerns. On the code side, the key rule is simple: never leave any attribute empty. For example, if you have an image tag, you must always include the alt text attribute. Similarly, heading tags, your H1, H2, H3, need to be used correctly and meaningfully. Every attribute in your HTML should be filled in with relevant content. Leaving attributes blank is a missed SEO opportunity. The meta tag side is handled separately, and both of these areas together form the foundation of on-page SEO. The instructor notes that by the time you're working with hosting, most of this should already be in place. Let's talk about how the admin panel and user login system works. The instructor explains that a button is placed somewhere on the website. This button, when clicked, takes the user to the login page. From there, the user enters their credentials and logs in, which then opens up the admin panel. Inside the admin panel, users can create and enter news entries and other content. An important point here is that the login credentials, the username and password, are provided by the developer. Users do not create their own accounts. The developer sets everything up, creates the credentials, and hands them over to the client. A student asks a great question here: how many users can be given access? The instructor's answer is flexible. You can create as many users as the client needs. There are two approaches. The first is shared credentials. Everyone on the team uses the same login and password. This is simple, but less ideal from a security and accountability standpoint. The second approach is to create individual accounts for each team member. The developer creates each account separately and provides each person with their own login and password. Once they have those credentials, they can log in independently and enter content on their own. Both approaches are valid. It really comes down to what the client requires. Another question comes up about whether users get their own dashboard, similar to what you'd see in a PHP admin panel. The instructor confirms that yes, users do get their own dashboard, but it's different from the admin dashboard. The user dashboard is limited based on what permissions the developer assigns. For example, a user might only be able to upload content or enter news entries. They can't manage other users or change system settings. This is the concept of roles and permissions. The instructor notes that the full details of roles and permissions, including multi-user setups, will be covered in the API module and the e-commerce module. So if you're wondering about more complex privilege systems, that's where to look. This is an important professional practice, the instructor emphasizes. When do you actually hand over the admin panel credentials to the client? The answer is not until everything is done. You complete all the coding first, run all your tests, make sure everything works correctly, and only then do you give the client their login and password. Even after handing over credentials, the instructor recommends keeping the project in a testing phase for around 1 week, letting the client review and use the system before it goes fully live. This gives you a buffer to catch any last-minute issues. Giving credentials too early, before testing is complete, is a common mistake to avoid. Now let's look at the process of uploading your project files to the hosting server. The instructor walks through this step by step. First, you prepare your project. The vendor folder is the heaviest part of the project. It takes up the most space. After zipping the project, it comes down to around 2 megabytes, which is actually quite small. For most hosting control panels, standard cPanel, you need to zip your files before uploading. However, Hostinger is a bit different. You can upload the folder directly without zipping. That said, the instructor actually recommends using standard cPanel over Hostinger's interface because Hostinger doesn't support some cPanel commands properly. Once uploaded, you navigate to the correct path in the file manager, select your zip file, and upload it. Once the file is uploaded, you need to extract it. The instructor points out a few things to watch out for during this step. First, be careful about refreshing the page while extraction is happening. If you refresh, it can log you out of the session, and then the extraction process gets stuck in a loop. Hosting panels have a session timeout feature for security reasons. They automatically log you out after a certain period of inactivity. If the extraction takes too long or something goes wrong, which the instructor experienced due to a slow network connection, the best approach is to delete the partially extracted files and start the extraction again. Also worth noting, when you delete files in some hosting panels, they go to a trash folder rather than being permanently deleted immediately, so check there if you're trying to free up space. This is a critical step that trips up a lot of beginners, getting the file structure right on the hosting server. When you upload your Laravel or PHP project, the files are nested inside a public folder, but on the hosting server, the index.php file needs to be at the very top level of your domain folder, that is, directly inside public HTML. If it's buried inside a subfolder, the website won't load correctly. So what you do is, take everything that's inside the public folder of your project, the index.php, the storage folder, the vendor folder, the bootstrap folder, and copy all of it directly into the domain's root folder, which is public HTML. The contents of public come out and sit at the top level. This is the correct structure for the site to work. Here's something that needs careful attention: the ... path notation and why you have to update it after moving files. In your original project, the index.php file sits inside the public folder. When it references other folders like storage or vendor, it uses ... which means go one step up in the directory. So ... /storage means go up one level out of public, then find storage. That works perfectly when the file is inside public. But once you move index.php up to the root of public HTML, it's no longer inside public anymore. So ... no longer points to the right place. You have to update those references in index.php to explicitly point to the project folder. For example, project name /storage instead of ... /storage. The same applies to vendor and bootstrap. This path update is essential. Without it, the application will break. The instructor summarizes the deployment process into 3 clear steps, and it's worth memorizing these. Step 1. Move the contents of your public folder out to the domain root. Everything inside public needs to be at the top level of public_HTML, so that index.php is the first file the server finds. Step 2. Update index.php to fix the file paths. Replace the ... references with the correct explicit paths pointing to your project folder. Step 3. And the instructor emphasizes this is the most important step: update the .end file. The .end file contains your database configuration, the database name, the database username, and the database password. These must exactly match what's set up on your hosting account. If any of these are wrong, you'll get an access denied error and the site won't connect to the database. Let's look at the .env file configuration more closely. The 3 values you absolutely must get right are the database name, the database username, and the database password. The instructor demonstrates this live. He copies the database name from cPanel's MySQL databases section and pastes it into the .env file. Then he does the same for the username. For the password, if you're not sure what it is, you can reset it directly in cPanel. Just go to the user in the MySQL databases section and set a new password. The instructor sets the password to match the username as a simple example. If any of these 3 values are wrong, you'll see an access denied error when you try to load the site. Once all 3 are correct and saved, the site should load. And indeed, after fixing these values, the instructor confirms the site comes up successfully. Even after the site loads, there's one more issue the instructor encounters. Images are not displaying. The browser shows a 403 forbidden error for image files. Here's why this happens. In a Laravel application, uploaded images are stored inside the storage folder, but the storage folder is not publicly accessible. The web server won't serve files from there directly for security reasons. To fix this, you need to create what's called a symbolic link, essentially a shortcut, that points from the public folder to the storage folder. This makes the images accessible for the web. The way to create this symlink is through the terminal using the command php artisan storage link. However, not all hosting providers give you terminal or SSH access by default. If you're on cPanel, you may need to enable the terminal feature first. This is an important step that's easy to miss when deploying for the first time. To fix the image loading issue, you need to use the terminal inside cPanel. The instructor walks through how to do this. First, log into your cPanel and find the terminal option. You can search for it. Once the terminal is open, you navigate to the correct directory using the cd public HTML command. Then you run php artisan storage link, which creates the symbolic link between the storage folder and the public folder. After running that command, reload your website and the images should now appear correctly. The instructor also reiterates here that Hostinger's interface doesn't always support all terminal commands properly, which is another reason to prefer standard cPanel hosting for projects like this. The symlink essentially creates a publicly accessible shortcut so that images stored in the private storage folder can be served to website visitors. To bring everything together from this section, here is the complete deployment checklist. These are the steps to follow every time you deploy a PHP or Laravel project to a live hosting server. Start by zipping your project and uploading it to the correct path in File Manager. Extract it, then move the contents of the public folder up to the domain root. Update index.php to fix the file paths, then update the .env file with the correct database name, username, and password. This is the most critical step. Next, open the terminal in cPanel and run the storage link command to fix image access. Reload the site and verify everything works. Then keep the project in a testing phase for about a week before handing over the admin credentials to the client. Following these steps in order will save you from the most common deployment errors. Picking up from where we left off, one of the most important rules in writing SEO-friendly HTML is this: no attribute should be left empty. Every single attribute you write in your HTML tags needs to have a meaningful value. Take the image tag as a perfect example. The alt attribute, short for alternate text, is what search engines read to understand what an image is about. If you leave it blank, the search engine has no idea what that image represents, and you lose a valuable SEO opportunity. The same principle applies to heading tags. Your H1, H2, H3, they need to be structured properly and used meaningfully. These are not just formatting tools. They are signals to search engines about the hierarchy and importance of your content. Now, an important practical point about where you actually do your SEO work. The instructor makes it clear that doing SEO on a real live website is far better than doing it on a subdomain. A subdomain is something like blog.yoursite.com. It's technically a separate entity from your main domain in the eyes of search engines. When you build SEO authority on a subdomain, that authority doesn't fully transfer back to your root domain. On the other hand, if your content lives directly on your main website, like yoursite.com/blog, all the SEO signals, the backlinks, the authority, everything stays consolidated on one domain. So as a developer, when you're setting up a project for a client or for yourself, always aim to deploy and optimize on the actual root website. So when it comes to SEO from a developer's perspective, not a digital marketer's perspective, but specifically as someone writing and deploying code, there are two core areas you need to focus on. The first is your HTML code structure, how you use heading tags, whether your images have alt text, whether you're using semantic HTML elements correctly. The second is meta tags. Meta tags are snippets of HTML that live in the head section of your page and communicate information about that page to search engines and social platforms. The instructor specifically calls out these two areas as the foundation of developer-side SEO. Let's look at each one more closely. Here's a rule that many beginners get wrong. Every single page on your website must have its own unique meta tags. This is especially true for the title tag and the meta description. Think about it from a search engine's perspective. If every page on your site has the same title, how does Google know which page is most relevant for a given search query? It can't. Duplicate titles and descriptions create confusion, and search engines may penalize your site or simply ignore the duplicates. The instructor uses their own project, SudumHub, as a real-world example. The homepage should have a title specific to the homepage. The About page should have a completely different title. Each page tells its own story to the search engine. The instructor walks through a real example using the SudumHub News Portal project. When you visit the homepage, you can see the title displayed in the Browser tab, and that title comes directly from the HTML title tag in the head section of your page. The instructor notes that the SEO code for SudumHub has already been written and implemented. However, they make an important point. Just because the code is in place doesn't mean the site will rank immediately. Ranking takes time. Search engines need to crawl your site, index your pages, and evaluate your content against competitors. Writing good SEO code is the foundation, but patience is also part of the process. Now let's shift to a very practical topic: terminal access on your hosting server. When you deploy a web application, especially one built with a framework like Laravel or Next.js, you often need to run command line instructions on the server. Not all hosting providers give you this access by default. Some simply don't offer it. But if your hosting uses cPanel, which is one of the most common web hosting control panels, you can open a terminal directly from within cPanel. The instructor emphasizes that you need to make sure this terminal access is available and enabled before you start working on the server. Without it, you won't be able to run the commands needed to set up your application properly. Once you have terminal access, the first thing you need to do is navigate to the correct directory, the path where your project lives on the server. The instructor explains that for a typical cPanel hosting setup, your project will be inside the public_HTML folder. From there, you navigate into your specific project folder, in this case, the news portal project called SudumHub. The command is straightforward. You use cd to change directory, first into public_HTML, then into your project folder. Once you're in the right place, you can run your artisan commands or any other framework-specific commands. Getting the path right is critical. Running commands from the wrong directory will either fail or cause unexpected behavior. Here's a command that every Laravel developer needs to know when deploying to a live server: php artisan storage link. Let's understand what this does and why it matters. In Laravel, when users upload files, like images, those files are stored in the storage/app/public directory. However, this folder is not directly accessible from the web. The only folder that's publicly accessible is the public folder. So how do you make those uploaded images show up on your website? You run the storage link command. What this does is create a symbolic link, essentially a shortcut, inside the public folder that points to the storage folder. After running this command, any image stored in storage becomes accessible through the browser. Without this step, your uploaded images simply won't appear on the live site. The instructor makes an important distinction here between copying files and creating a symbolic link. You might think, why not just copy all the images from the storage folder into the public folder? The problem with copying is that it duplicates your files, wastes storage space, and creates a maintenance headache. Every time a new image is uploaded, you'd have to copy it again. A symbolic link, on the other hand, is like a shortcut. It doesn't move or duplicate any files. It simply creates a pointer inside the public folder that says, look over here in the storage folder. Any file that exists in storage is instantly accessible through that link. It's efficient, clean, and the correct way to handle this in Laravel. The instructor describes it as moving the reference rather than moving the actual files. Once you've run the storage/link command, the final step is simply to refresh your browser. And just like that, your images appear on the live website. The instructor walks through this exact sequence. Navigate to the correct project path in the terminal, run the php artisan storage/link command, and then refresh the page. The news portal's article thumbnails and images that were previously missing will now load correctly. It's a simple but absolutely essential step in deploying a Laravel application. If after running the command your images still don't show up, one thing to check is the file permissions on your storage folder. The web server needs read access to those files. But in most standard setups, running that one command is all it takes. So here is the core problem we are dealing with. When you visit a website, each page should have its own unique title, the one you see in the Browser tab. On the home page, you might want code.itn/home, and on the About page, code.itn/about, and on the Services page, something else entirely. But here's the catch. All of these pages share the same layout file. The title tag lives inside that layout, and that layout is common to every single page. So how do we make one layout file produce a different title depending on which page is being visited? That is exactly the problem we are solving right now. This is not just a cosmetic concern, it is a fundamental SEO requirement. Search engines use the page title as one of the primary signals to understand what a page is about. If every page on your site has the same title, search engines cannot distinguish between them, and your rankings will suffer. The instructor mentions that the SEO code has already been written, and now it is time to make sure the titles are dynamic and unique per page. Home gets its own title, About gets its own, Services gets its own, and article pages should ideally show the article's own meta title. Each one must be distinct. The solution is to use props, short for properties. Think of props as a way to pass data from one place to another. Each individual page file calls the shared layout, and when it does, it can pass along a piece of data, in this case, the title for that specific page. The layout then receives that data and uses it inside the title tag. So instead of the title being hard-coded in the layout, it becomes a variable that gets filled in by whoever is calling the layout. This is a very common and powerful pattern in web development, shared components that accept customizable data from the outside. Here's the first step. On the homepage file, when we call or include the layout, we pass along the title as a key-value pair. The key is title, that is the name of the prop, and the value is the actual title string we want to display, something like code.itn/home. The instructor demonstrates this by writing the title prop directly in the call to the layout. So the homepage is essentially saying, hey layout, here is my title, please use it. This is how the data travels from the individual page into the shared layout component. Now, on the layout side, we need to tell it to expect this incoming data. This is done using the @props directive, where we list the names of the props this layout is prepared to accept, in this case, title. Think of it like a customs checkpoint at an airport. The instructor uses exactly this analogy. Someone travels from Nepal to America, but they cannot just walk in freely. There is a checkpoint. Similarly, the layout needs to formally declare that it is expecting a prop called title before it can use it. Once declared, we can use the variable $title inside double curly braces wherever we want the title to appear, in this case, inside the HTML title tag. The instructor uses a really memorable analogy here. Imagine someone traveling from Nepal to America. The person in Nepal sends a traveler. That traveler is the data, the title. But when they arrive in America, they cannot just walk through freely. There is an airport checkpoint. The checkpoint verifies, is this the right person? Is everything in order? Only then do they get through. In the same way, the layout file has a checkpoint, the @props declaration. If the home page passes the title prop and the layout declares it, everything works fine. But if the About page calls the same layout without passing the title prop, the layout has no idea what $title is, and you get an undefined variable error. The checkpoint catches the problem. Now, what happens when a page like the entertainment or category page calls the layout but forgets to pass the title prop? You get an undefined variable error. The layout tries to use $title, but it was never defined for that page. The fix is to use a fallback default value. In PHP and Blade, you can use the double question mark operator, the null coalescing operator, to say use $title if it exists, and if it does not, fall back to a default string like code.itn. The instructor explains this clearly. The two question marks mean if this is not set, use what comes after. This way, pages that have not yet been updated to pass a title will still display something sensible instead of crashing with an error. Once you wire up the layout to use the title prop, every single page that calls that layout now needs to pass its own title. The instructor makes this point clearly. If the layout is now set up to use $title, then all pages are responsible for providing it. The home page is done, but the About page, Services page, Category page, and Article pages all still need to be updated. For most pages, this is straightforward. You just pass a static string. But for the Article page, it gets more interesting, because the title should be dynamic. It should reflect the actual article being viewed, not a hard-coded string. For Article pages, the title cannot be a static string. It needs to reflect the actual article being displayed. The instructor explores this and notes that they already have a meta title field on articles. So when passing the title prop from the Article page, you can pass the article's meta title. And if the meta title is not set for some reason, you fall back to the article's regular title using the null coalescing operator again. The instructor even tests whether you can pass a dynamic expression directly into the prop, and it works. So the Article page can send its own article's meta title directly into the layout's title tag, making every Article page have a completely unique and meaningful browser title. Let us quickly trace the full flow. Each individual page, Home, About, Services, Article, passes its own title as a prop when it calls the shared layout. The layout declares that it accepts this prop using @props. Inside the layout, the title tag uses the $title variable with a fallback default in case the prop is missing. The browser then renders a unique, meaningful title for every page. This is the power of props. You write the layout once, but it can behave differently depending on what data each page sends into it. No code duplication, no separate layout files per page, just one smart, flexible layout. Now let us shift to a different but equally important topic, file management and getting your application ready for production. The first command to know is PHP artisan storage link. In Laravel, when you upload files like images, they get stored in the storage directory, which is not directly accessible from the browser. Running the storage link command creates a symbolic link, essentially a shortcut, inside the public folder that points to the storage directory. After running this command, your uploaded images become publicly accessible through the browser. The instructor confirms this. After running the command and refreshing the page, the images load correctly.
The instructor makes an important distinction here between copying a file and creating a symlink. When you copy a file, you get two separate copies in two locations, but a symlink, or symbolic link, is more like a shortcut. It does not duplicate the file. Instead, it creates a pointer that says the real file is over there. The storage link command creates exactly this kind of shortcut. It is more efficient than copying because you are not duplicating storage space, and any changes to the original file are automatically reflected through the symlink. This is the recommended approach in Laravel for making uploaded files publicly accessible.
Next up is configuring the .env file for a production environment. There are 3 critical settings to update. First, set app URL to your live domain, and the instructor specifically notes, do not put a trailing slash at the end of the URL. Second, set app debug to false. When debug mode is on, Laravel shows detailed error messages, including file paths and database information. That is great for development, but a serious security risk on a live site. Third, change app environment from local to production. This tells Laravel to behave as a production application, enabling optimizations and disabling development-only features. After saving these changes, the instructor confirms that everything, including the favicon, starts working correctly. The final piece covered here is admin panel configuration. The instructor notices that the admin panel has a sign up for an account option showing, which is a problem on a live site because you do not want random visitors creating admin accounts. The fix involves adding a function called CanAccessPanel to the user model. This function acts as a gatekeeper. It checks whether the currently logged in user is authorized to access the admin panel. Without this function, the access control does not work properly, which is why the option to sign up was appearing unexpectedly. The instructor realizes they had forgotten to add this function and corrects it. Always make sure your admin panel has proper access restrictions before going live. Continuing from where we left off, let's talk about something that trips up a lot of developers when they first start thinking about SEO, the difference between an article title and a meta title. These are not the same thing, even though they often look the same. The article title is what the reader sees on the page. It's written for humans. The meta title, on the other hand, is what gets sent to search engines. It lives in the HTML head tag, and it's specifically crafted for SEO. Now, if a meta title doesn't exist for a given article, you'd fall back to using the article title, and that's fine. But the real power comes when you have a dedicated meta title field, because then you can write something slightly different, something optimized for search rankings, without changing what the reader sees. One of the key points being made here is that the meta title is dynamic. What does that mean exactly? It means you don't hard-code a fixed title into your template. Instead, the template reads whatever was saved in the database for that particular article or page and outputs it automatically. So when someone enters a news article and fills in the meta title field, that exact value gets pulled and placed into the HTML head tag. You don't need to touch the code every time a new article is published. This is the correct way to build scalable content systems. The code stays the same, and the content changes dynamically based on what's in the database. Here's a concrete example of why you'd want these two titles to be different. Imagine your article title is something engaging and journalistic, written to grab a reader's attention. But your meta title might be more keyword-focused, something that matches what people actually type into Google. You might also append your site name or category to the meta title for branding purposes. SEO best practices around meta titles include things like keyword placement, character limits, and making sure the title accurately reflects the page content. The point is, the article title serves the reader, and the meta title serves the search engine. Having a separate field for each gives you full control over both. Now let's look at how this actually works in code. The meta title is passed as a dynamic variable, something like $meta title, inside the HTML meta tag. This variable gets its value from whatever was saved in the database for that specific page. The instructor makes an important point here. You don't need to hard-code a static value into this tag. Because it's dynamic, the template automatically picks up the right title for every single page without any manual intervention. This is clean, scalable code. The hard-coded approach would break down the moment you have hundreds of articles. You'd have to manually update each one. The dynamic approach solves that entirely. It's not just individual articles that need meta titles. Category pages do too, and for a very important reason. When someone searches for a broad topic like sports news or technology updates, your category page is what should appear in the search results. That means category pages need to be properly optimized for SEO, and that starts with a well-crafted meta title. The instructor points out that just like articles, categories can have their own meta title field in the database, and that value should be passed dynamically into the category page's HTML head. The logic is the same. Pull from the database, output dynamically, keep the code clean. This is a really important distinction that the instructor draws, and it's one that a lot of beginners get confused about. Not every page on your website needs to be optimized for search engine ranking. Specifically, your internal search results page, the page that appears when a user types something into the search bar on your own website, does not need to rank on Google. Think about it. Nobody goes to Google and searches for search results page on my site. That page is only ever reached by users who are already on your website, so you don't need to put heavy SEO effort into its meta title. A simple descriptive title is perfectly fine. Category pages, on the other hand, absolutely need SEO optimization because external users can discover them through search engines. Even though the search results page doesn't need to rank on Google, the instructor still recommends making its meta title dynamic and meaningful. The way to do this is by using the $Q variable, which represents whatever the user typed into the search bar. So if someone searches for Nepal election, the meta title of the search results page would automatically become Search Nepal Election. This is a small but thoughtful touch. It doesn't help with external SEO, but it does make the page more descriptive and user-friendly. It also helps with browser tab identification. If a user has multiple tabs open, they can see exactly what they searched for in each one. The meta title is just one piece of the SEO puzzle. The instructor mentions that there are other meta tags you'll commonly need as well. Meta keywords, a comma-separated list of relevant terms, used to be very important for search engines, though their weight has decreased over time. Meta description is arguably even more important than keywords today. It's the short paragraph that appears under your page title in Google search results, and it directly influences whether someone clicks on your link or not. A great way to learn how these tags are used in the real world is to visit any well-optimized website, right-click, and select View Page Source. You'll see all these meta tags right there in the head section, and you can study how professional sites structure them. Now we shift to a completely different but equally important topic, securing the admin panel. The instructor notices that a Sign Up for Account option is still showing up and flags this immediately as something that must be fixed. In a production admin panel, you absolutely cannot allow open public registration. If anyone can sign up and create an account, your entire admin system is compromised. The fix involves two things. First, adding a Can Access Panel function that checks whether a user has explicit permission to access the admin area before letting them in. Second, removing the registration option from both the local development environment and the live server. The instructor also notes the specific file path where this code needs to be added, inside the provider directory of the application. The Can Access Panel function is essentially a security gate for your admin area. Without it, your application might allow any registered user, or even anyone who manages to create an account, to walk right into the admin dashboard. That's a serious vulnerability. By implementing this function at the provider or middleware level, you ensure that every single request to the admin panel goes through a permission check first. Only users who have been explicitly granted panel access will get through. The instructor admits this was accidentally left out and needed to be added, which is a good reminder that even experienced developers can miss things. This is exactly why you should have a pre-deployment checklist that includes verifying all access control mechanisms are in place. Continuing from where we left off with the title tag, there are two more meta tags that are essential for SEO, the meta description and the meta keywords. Now, if you've ever right-clicked on a web page and viewed the page source of any well-optimized site, you'll notice these meta tags sitting right there in the head section. Let's break down what each one does. The meta description is what search engines use to generate that short snippet of text you see under a page title in search results. It doesn't directly control ranking, but it tells both the search engine and the user what the page is about. The meta keywords tag lists the terms that users might type into a search engine to find your content. Both of these tags belong inside the head section of your layout file, and that's exactly where we'll be placing them. One thing that often confuses beginners is you add your meta description, you check Google, and you still see the old text. Why? Because Google doesn't instantly know you've made a change. It has to crawl your page again, process the new content, and update its index. This can take anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on how frequently Google visits your site. So if you've just added these tags and the search results still shows old information, that's completely normal. The cached version of your page is what's being displayed until Google reindexes it. Patience is key here. Over time, it will update. Now, where exactly do these meta tags go in a Laravel project? They go inside your layout file, typically the main Blade layout file, something like app.blade.php. Inside the head section of that file, you add your meta tags right alongside the title tag. The beauty of using a layout file is that you define these tags once, and every page that extends this layout will automatically include them. This is the standard approach for keeping your SEO setup clean and centralized. Let's look at the actual structure of a meta tag, because it's important to understand both attributes. Every meta tag has two key attributes, name and content. The name attribute tells the browser and search engines what kind of meta information this is. If it's a description, you write name equals description. If it's keywords, you write name equals keywords. The content attribute is where you put the actual value. For description, that's a short summary of what the page is about. For keywords, it's a comma-separated list of search terms your target audience might use. both attributes must be present for the tag to function correctly. Here's what the actual code looks like when you put it all together. Inside your Layouts head section, you first have your title tag, and then right below it, you add your 2 meta tags. The description tag gets a concise, readable sentence or 2 that summarizes the page. The keywords tag gets a list of relevant search terms separated by commas. These are the terms you expect users to type into Google when looking for content like yours. This is a minimal but effective SEO setup that every web project should have from the start. Now, let's shift to a debugging scenario that comes up when working with Filament, the admin panel package for Laravel. After making certain configuration changes, you might find that you can no longer access the admin panel at all. The fix involves implementing the CanAccessPanel method in your user model. Here's the process. First, navigate to your user model, which lives inside the app, then models, then user.php. Next, make sure your user class implements the Filament user interface and also the CanAccessPanel interface. Then, add the CanAccessPanel method and simply return true. This tells Filament that all users are allowed to access the panel. Don't forget to import the panel class at the top of the file. Save, refresh, and your panel should be accessible again. Here's the complete implementation in code. Your user class needs to implement the Filament user interface, and then you define the CanAccessPanel method that returns a Boolean. Returning true means every authenticated user can access the panel. Now, in a real production application, you'd want to be more selective, for example, only allowing users with an admin role. But for development and testing purposes, returning true is perfectly fine and gets you back into the panel quickly. Once you save the user.php file and refresh the panel URL, the changes take effect immediately. An important point that comes up here is the difference between your local environment and your live server. When you make a configuration change, like removing registration from the panel, you've only done it locally on your machine. The live server still has the old configuration, so you need to copy that updated code and paste it into the corresponding file on the server as well. The workflow is straightforward. Select all the code with Control-A, copy it with Control-C, navigate to the correct file on the server, which is inside the providers folder, paste it in, save, and refresh. This is a habit you need to build whenever you make configuration changes. Always sync both environments.
You might notice a not secure warning appearing in the browser when visiting a subdomain. This is because the subdomain doesn't yet have HTTPS enabled. It's running on plain HTTP, which modern browsers flag as insecure. The fix is simple. Go into your hosting control panel, find the domain section, locate your subdomain, and turn on SSL or force HTTPS. Now, this doesn't happen instantly. It takes a little time to propagate. And since this is just a development or testing subdomain, it's not critically urgent, but it's still good practice to have SSL enabled everywhere. Once you turn it on and wait a bit, the warning will disappear.
Another thing worth understanding is why your newly published page doesn't show up in Google search right away. The answer is simple. Google hasn't crawled it yet. When you first publish a page, Google's bots don't know it exists until they visit your site. Once they do, they index the content, and only then does it appear in search results. This process can take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. In the meantime, make sure you've done everything on your end. Add your meta tags, enable HTTPS, and ideally submit your sitemap to Google Search Console to speed things up. But ultimately, some waiting is unavoidable.
Looking ahead, the next major project is going to be a news portal API, and this is where things start getting significantly more complex. It won't just be a simple CRUD application, though CRUD will be the foundation. On top of that, the project will cover user login and registration, roles and permissions, middleware, and full authentication and authorization flows. These are all critical real-world topics that every backend developer needs to understand deeply. And importantly, this will be a completely new project, a fresh start, not an extension of what's been built so far. The difficulty level is going to ramp up, so be prepared to engage more actively with the material as each concept builds on the last.
Picking up from where we left off, when we talk about meta tags, there are 2 fundamental pieces to every meta tag: the name and the content. The name is the identifier, things like keywords or description. The content is the actual value that gets passed in. Now here's the critical point. The content must be dynamic. If you're on the homepage, the description should reflect the homepage. If you're on an article page, the description should reflect that specific article. You absolutely cannot use the same meta content across every page. That's a major SEO mistake. Each page needs its own unique, relevant meta information. So how do we actually implement this? The layout file defines the meta tag structure, and each individual page passes its own values into those slots. For the home page, since the content is mostly static, you might hard-code values like code, IT, web development as keywords and write a short description manually. But for article pages and category pages, those values come straight from the database, the article's own keywords field and its own description field. The layout receives these as variables, say $keywords and $description, and renders them inside the meta tags. One very important lesson here: if you misspell the variable name, even one letter off, the tag will render empty. This actually happened during development, where both keywords and description were misspelled, causing the meta tags to show up blank in the page source. When you want to verify that your meta tags are actually working, the quickest way is to right-click on the page in your browser and choose View Page Source. Then search for the word meta in that source code. If your keywords and description tags show up with empty content attributes, nothing between the quotes, that tells you something went wrong. Either the variable wasn't passed from the child page to the layout, or there's a spelling mismatch. In the example we walked through, the variable name in the layout said keywords, but the page was passing keyword, singular versus plural, and that one-letter difference caused the entire tag to render blank. Always double-check your variable names match exactly on both ends. Now, beyond this standard SEO meta tags, there's another important category called Open Graph Tags, or OG tags. You've definitely seen these in action. When you paste a link into Facebook or Messenger, a preview card pops up showing an image, a title, and sometimes a short description. That preview is powered entirely by Open Graph meta tags embedded in the page's HTML. The two most important ones are OG image, which controls what thumbnail appears, and OG title, which controls the headline shown in the preview. One key syntax difference to remember: regular meta tags use the name attribute, but Open Graph tags use the property attribute instead. That's not a typo, it's intentional and required for OG tags to work correctly. When implementing OG tags in the layout file, you pass the image URL into the og.image property and the page title into og.title. For article pages, the image is the article's own featured image. You pass it the same way you'd pass any dynamic asset, using the asset helper with the storage URL. For static pages, like the home page or category pages, you can hard-code a path to your site's logo or a default image. Beyond image and title, you can also add og.sitename for your website's name, og.type to indicate the content type, like article, and og.url, which can automatically use the current page's URL without needing to pass anything manually. These tags together give social platforms everything they need to generate a rich preview card. Here's something that many developers overlook. The HTML tags you choose actually communicate meaning to search engines. This is called semantic HTML. When you wrap your news article content inside an article tag, you're telling Google's crawler, this is the primary content of this page, rate it carefully and index it. When you wrap an advertisement or sidebar content inside an aside tag, you're telling Google, this is supplementary or external content, skip it during indexing. Using a generic section tag gives no such signal. So for a news portal, every article should be wrapped in the article tag, not just a section tag. And any ad blocks or third-party widgets should go inside aside tags so they don't dilute your SEO score with irrelevant content.
There's an important principle worth understanding here. Even for a team or company website where a blog might seem unnecessary, having one dramatically improves SEO. Here's why. Every new article you publish is a new page that Google can index, with its own unique keywords, its own title, its own description. The more quality pages you have, the more search queries you can potentially rank for. For a news portal specifically, this is even more powerful. Publishing articles daily means Google's crawler visits your site frequently, which signals that your site is active and authoritative. The content itself does the SEO work over time. You don't need to do anything extra. Just keep publishing good, well-structured articles. The favicon is that tiny icon you see in the browser tab next to the page title. It's a small detail, but it matters for professionalism and brand recognition. To generate one, you can use a free tool like favicon.io. Upload your logo image, or if you don't have one ready, you can even generate one from text or an emoji just for testing purposes. Download the zip file it generates, extract it, and find the favicon.ico file. Copy that file directly into your project's public folder, replacing whatever placeholder was there. Frameworks like Laravel and Next.js automatically serve whatever favicon.ico file is in the public directory, so no additional configuration is needed. Once you drop it in and refresh, your browser tab should show the new icon, though sometimes browser caching means it takes a moment to update. A sitemap is essentially a map of your entire website that you hand to Google. It lists every page on your site so Google's crawler knows exactly where to go and what to index. To generate one, you can use a tool like xml-sitemaps.com.
Paste in your website's URL, let it scan all your pages, and download the result as a zip file. Inside, you'll find files like sitemap.xml, sitemap.html, and a URL list. Copy all of these directly into your project's public folder, not inside any subfolder, right at the root of public. Once your site is hosted, you then go to Google Search Console, add your website as a property, navigate to the sitemap section, and submit the URL of your sitemap. From that point on, Google checks your sitemap regularly and indexes your pages. This is what gets your site appearing in search results. Google Search Console is your command center for understanding how Google sees your website. The first thing you do after hosting your site is add it as a property in Search Console and complete the verification process. Google needs to confirm you actually own the domain. Once verified, you submit your sitemap URL in the sitemap section. After that, Google begins crawling your pages. You can monitor which pages have been indexed under the Pages or Coverage section. Over time, typically within 2 to 4 weeks, your pages will appear in Google's index, and you'll start seeing data in the Performance section showing which search queries are bringing visitors to your site. If you rebuilt a website, you might see old pages still listed. Those will gradually disappear as Google recrawls and finds they no longer exist. Once your site is hosted, running an SEO audit is a great way to get a comprehensive picture of what needs improvement. These tools go far beyond just checking meta tags. They analyze your heading structure, content quality, keyword usage, internal links, and even whether you have a privacy policy page linked. In the example walkthrough, the audit flagged several issues. The meta description wasn't being detected, likely because the tool crawled too quickly before the page fully loaded. Heading tags were being repeated incorrectly, and some article pages had thin content. It also flagged missing links to a privacy policy and terms of service page, which is actually a significant SEO signal. The key takeaway is to work through these issues in priority order, starting with the critical ones like missing meta descriptions, and gradually improving your score over time. Before you project to a hosting server, there are a few important preparation steps. First, run npm run build. This compiles all your Tailwind CSS into a final optimized CSS file inside the build folder. After this, you don't need to run npm dev on the server at all. Second, delete the node modules folder. This folder is enormous, sometimes hundreds of megabytes, and it's completely unnecessary on the server because the server doesn't run npm commands. There's also a security concern. Node modules contains third-party packages, and some of those packages could potentially have vulnerabilities that make your server easier to attack. Always delete it before uploading. You can also remove any AI configuration folders like .claude. Then zip your entire project and upload that zip file to your hosting control panel. This is the clean, production-ready version of your project. At the most fundamental level, hosting a website involves two things: a domain name and a server. The domain name is the human-readable address people type into their browser, like sudamhub.com. The server is the actual computer where your files, your code, and your database live. These two are connected through DNS settings. The domain points to the server's IP address. When you're ready to host, you log into your hosting control panel, typically cPanel. Go to the File Manager, navigate to the public_HTML directory, upload your project zip file, and extract it there. You'll also need to configure your .env file with the correct database credentials and your live app URL. One useful trick mentioned here, you can create subdomains, like demo.sudamhub.com, to host demo versions for clients without touching your main site. Now we're shifting into the API section of the project. For the NJ API, basic CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete, are just the starting point. A real-world API needs much more than that. Coming up, we'll be covering user registration, user login, roles and permissions, and middleware. These topics build on each other progressively, so the complexity increases gradually. The important thing is to work at your own pace. Don't rush past a concept before you're comfortable with it, because each layer depends on understanding the one before it. Authentication and authorization are what separate a toy API from a production-ready one. During the live debugging session, a few common Eloquent relationship errors came up that are worth understanding clearly. The first one, if you define a relationship method in your model but forget to write the return keyword before the relationship call, the method returns null silently. Then when you try to call .get on that null value, you get a cryptic error. Always make sure every relationship method has an explicit return statement. The second issue, capitalization matters in class names. If you write course with a lowercase c instead of course with an uppercase c when referencing the model class, PHP won't find the class correctly. A quick way to catch structural errors like these is to right-click in VS Code and choose Format Document. This re-indents your code and makes mismatched brackets and missing statements much easier to spot. The enrollment form has a relationship with the course table. Each enrollment record belongs to a specific course. This is a classic belongs to relationship in Eloquent. The enrollment table stores a course ID as a foreign key, and the enrollment model has a course method that returns the related course model. On the other side, the course model has a has-many relationship back to enrollments. When you're building the edit form for an enrollment, the course dropdown needs to load all available courses from the database. If that dropdown appears empty, it usually means either the relationship method is broken, missing a return statement, for example, or the course records themselves were accidentally deleted from the database during testing. In that case, simply re-enter some test course data, and the dropdown will populate correctly. When working with images in your project, there are two distinct categories to handle differently. Dynamic images, like article-featured images or user-uploaded content, are stored in the storage folder and served through Laravel's storage symlink. You reference them using the asset helper combined with storage URL. Static images, like your site logo or a default Open Graph image, live directly in the public folder and are referenced with just the asset helper and a direct path. For Open Graph tags specifically, keep in mind that social platforms need an absolute URL, the full HTTP or HTTPS address, not a relative path. On a live Linux server, file paths are also case-sensitive, so if your file is saved as image.jpg with a capital I, but your code references image.jpg with a lowercase I, the image simply won't load. Always double-check casing when moving from a Windows development machine to a Linux server. Let's talk about hosting and deployment, two concepts that are absolutely essential once your front-end work is complete. There are two key pieces to understand here: the domain name and the server. Think of the server as the place where your actual code lives. During development, that server was essentially your own machine, your VS Code running on localhost at the IP address 127.0.0.1. Now, for production, the server is a real machine you rent, in this case, a cPanel server. The domain name, on the other hand, is simply the human-readable name that points to that server. When someone types your domain name into a browser, it hits the server. The server runs your code and sends back a response. The domain name itself can be registered for free at .com.np, but the server, that you have to purchase.
Now, one important concept before we deploy: the difference between run dev and run build. When you're actively working on your project, designing layouts, making things responsive, tweaking Tailwind classes, you use run dev. This keeps a live server running that watches your files and recompiles on the fly. But once your front-end work is complete, you switch to run build. Run build takes all those Tailwind utility classes and compiles them into a final, optimized output. You only need to run it once, unless you add new changes, in which case you run it again. The key rule is finish your front-end work, run build, then deploy. Don't skip this step, because without it, your styles won't be properly compiled for production. When you deploy a web application, there are always two separate things you need to set up on the server. First, your files, the actual code, your PHP files, your compiled CSS, your JavaScript, everything. These get uploaded through the file manager in cPanel and placed inside the public_HTML folder. Second, your database. Your application needs a MySQL database to store and retrieve data, and this has to be created separately through the MySQL databases section in cPanel. Both of these components are required. If you upload your files but forget to set up the database, your application simply won't work. Keep this in mind as a checklist: files first, then database. Since the instructor doesn't have a spare main domain to demonstrate with, the class is using subdomains instead, and this is actually a very practical approach. A subdomain is essentially a branch of your main domain. So if your main domain is sudumhub.com, you can create portal.sudumhub.com as a completely separate hosting space for your news portal project. The cPanel account being used already has around 8 to 9 subdomains, all for different Laravel projects. To create one, you go to Domains in cPanel, click Create a new domain, type in your subdomain name, like portal.sudumhub.com, and submit. This is a great way to host multiple student projects under a single server without buying additional domains. If you ever need to host on a main domain, the instructor mentioned they'll record a separate tutorial for that. Once your subdomain is created, the next step is uploading your code. You do this through the file manager in cPanel. Navigate into public_HTML, and inside there, you'll find the folder for your subdomain. In this case, something like newsportal.sub-hub.com. This is where your project files need to go. Before you upload, make sure you've already run the build command so your Tailwind CSS is fully compiled. Then you zip up your project folder and upload that zip file into the file manager.
After uploading, you extract it right there in the file manager. The instructor zipped the project specifically because cPanel's file upload works best with a single zip file rather than uploading hundreds of individual files one by one. The second major piece of deployment is the database. In cPanel, go to MySQL databases and create a new database. Give it a meaningful name. Then create a database user with a strong password and add that user to the database, making sure to grant all privileges. Once that's done, you need to update your Laravel.env file with these new credentials: the database name, username, and password. This is a step many beginners forget, and it causes the application to crash because it can't connect to the database. After updating the credentials, you'll also need to run your migrations on the server so that all your tables are created in the new database. Now, let's talk about a very common issue that came up during the session: image storage. In Laravel, there are two different places where images can be saved: the public folder, which is directly accessible from the browser, and the storage folder, which requires a special helper to generate the correct URL. The problem that occurred here was a mismatch. Images were being saved to one location, say the public images folder, but the front end was trying to load them using the storage URL helper, which looks in the storage folder. This mismatch means the images simply don't appear. The fix requires making sure both the saving side and the displaying side are using the same storage path. On the controller side, the fix involves changing where the image is stored. Previously, the code was using the move method and saving the image into a folder called images inside the public directory. The correction is to change that path so the image goes into the storage folder instead. Specifically, in the controller, around line 9, as mentioned in the session, you change the word images to storage in the move call. Then, importantly, you remove the extra images path that was appended below it, because the storage helper automatically handles that path for you. This ensures that when the image is saved, it goes to the correct location that Laravel's storage URL system expects. On the Vue side, inside the Blade template, the image tag also needs to be updated. Previously, the image source was using the asset helper, which looks directly inside the public folder. The fix is to replace that with storage::URL, passing in the course image variable. So the full syntax is double curly braces, storage with a capital S, :URL, and then the course image variable in parentheses. This tells Laravel to look inside the storage folder and generate the correct public URL for the image. The file to edit is inside Resources, Views, then either the Enrollment or Courses folder in the index Blade file. Find the image tag, cut the course image variable, and wrap it with storage URL. There's one more critical step when deploying: running php artisan storage.link. Here's why this matters. Laravel stores uploaded files in the storage folder, which is not directly accessible from the browser for security reasons. The storage.link command creates a symbolic link, essentially a shortcut, from public/storage to storage/app/public. Once this link exists, when storage URL generates a path like /storage/filename.jpg, the browser can actually reach SOP files through the public folder. Without running this command, even if you fix the controller and the view correctly, your images will still not load. Run this command once on the server after deployment, and it will stay in place. If you're seeing a forbidden error when trying to access an image, the issue is likely the file system disk configuration. Laravel has two main disk configurations defined in config/filesystems.php. The local disk stores files in storage/app/private and is marked as private, meaning the browser cannot access these files directly. The public disk stores files in storage/app/public and is marked as public, meaning files here are accessible through the browser via the symbolic link we just created. If your images are being stored on the local disk instead of the public disk, you'll get a forbidden error. The fix is to explicitly specify the public disk when storing files, using storage disk public in your controller. Let's bring everything together with a complete deployment checklist. First, finish all your front-end work. Second, run npm run build to compile your Tailwind CSS. Third, zip your project. Fourth, create a subdomain in cPanel. Fifth, upload and extract your zip through the file manager into the correct subdomain folder. Sixth, create your MySQL database, user, and grant privileges. Seventh, update your .env file with the new database credentials. Eighth, run php artisan migrate to create your tables. Ninth, run php artisan storage link so your images are publicly accessible. 10th, Make sure your controller saves images to the public disk and your views use storage URL to display them. And finally, test everything on the live site. Miss any one of these steps and something will break. Use this as your go-to checklist every time you deploy a Laravel project.
And that brings us to the end of this section. Let's recap the big ideas. First, understand the difference between a domain name and a server. One is the address, the other is where your code actually runs. Second, always run npm run build before deploying. Run dev is strictly for development. Third, deployment has two parts. Your files go into the file manager, and your database is set up separately through MySQL databases in cPanel. And fourth, the image storage issue is one of the most common gotchas in Laravel deployment. Make sure you're saving images to the public disk, displaying them with storage URL in your views, and running PHP Artisan storage link on the server. Get these 4 things right, and your Laravel application will be live and fully functional. Subdomains are a great way to practice all of this without needing to buy extra domains, so take advantage of that as you build and deploy your own projects.